Bryce, and welcome to my workshop.
I'm just back from the big box store. I got a piano hinge. That's going to be just right for that front door on the router table. We also have to look at some dust collection, and I need a way to mount my Incra-Jig on that table, and right now I don't have that. I got a few ideas there. Come on inside. Let me show you what I got in mind.
Let's build a new router table. Part 5, Dust and Doors.
Last episode we were focused on the drawer faces for the caddies and the drawers. Now we're looking at dust collection, and the first thing we're going to do is look at this door here. Now we need a frame. The frame is going to surround the outside, the plexiglass is going to be in the middle. And I have some culls right here from these drawer faces, and we'll use this to build a door frame. The panel will be plexiglass, but first let's get started on this. They need a little cleanup, they need a little dimensioning, and then we'll start on the joinery. I have my pieces marked and I want them book matched. So I'm going to start doing the outside of each. Mark on each side.
When you're edge joining and taking off a very small amount, it is wise to mark both edges of the wood, because you don't always take the whole thing off on the first pass. You may need to, but you won't know that if you don't mark it.
All right, we're marked. I know where I've been. Don't want to take off that much.
Things aren't quite as lively since I took a foot out of that hose. Took 2 passes after all.
If your pieces get too thin, you can always opt to this method to put them through the planer. This is right on the border. I usually like 1 inch thick before I'll put one through, and these are a little less than that, 3/4. So I've ganged them up. Now, when I put these clamps on, I made sure it was sitting on the face of the joiner so they were absolutely flat. Put medium pressure on these. The rollers will actually push this flat and give you a real good cut. So again, make sure that your clamps are below the level of your cut and you should be fine.
I don't see any sparks.
My tenon jig is all tuned in and I'm happy with the cut. I've made marks on each one of these planks to make sure that I understand which side gets cut off. That's important. It's this side. So because my board is so narrow, usually they're a little larger, my fence in the back here isn't helping me out any. So I'm going to use a square to make sure that we're squared up good and straight. It's not as critical for this type of a joint because we're going to square it up on the table saw when we put the crosscut slit on. So this is a little bit belt and suspenders. Now, it's very close, but any deviations we're going to clean up on the drum sander when we put them in flat. After I get all these joints done, we still have to put the groove in the center to receive the plexiglass. But let's go ahead and get this first cut done. What I like to do on this is, I don't like to have this little piece bound up when I pull this through We could bind up on this. So I've got him raised up a touch. Also, if you'll make the first cut and clip off this edge right here, that almost guarantees that nothing will happen. I've already done this, but I'll demonstrate here where you just take this, put it over the blade, cut that first, and then you cut the rest with this. There's no worry about kickback or anything happening. That's pretty good. I'll go ahead and finish up this cut here. Moment of truth. Oh yeah, that'll be real nice. Well, my assembly looks good. I'm quite pleased with it. Everything's lining up very nicely. But when I looked at this plastic sheet of panel and looked at the thickness, I was a little bit dismayed. My focus was on price. Everything's getting expensive. And while this thin panel is strong enough for this application, I don't have a blade that can cut anything that thin. So we're going to switch gears here. Again, it's a problem, but it's how you solve it that matters. We're going to go ahead and glue this up and get it assembled and get ourselves situated to go over to the drum sander and get final thickness on it. After that, we'll come back to the router table and we'll put a recess in the back of the assembly. And that recess will be there such that the panel can fit inside of it. After that, we'll screw a lip on around the back to hold it in place. So a few more steps, but I think we're going to be okay with this. So let's get this assembled and glued up, and then we'll start looking at some of the other dust collection aspects. Well, I've done some test fitting, and when I put this together, it gets pretty square. But my concern is, will it stay square after I get it there? I don't want to put nails in this. It's just too thin and too delicate. Plus, I need an enormous amount of strength, so I have to grip it pretty hard. And there's a lot of things to push and pull on. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using what is called a picture frame jig. And it's a little bit of a Rube Goldberg device. What it amounts to is, as you take this screw and tighten him up, it actually pulls the four corners in tight. And it will square things up better than just about any jig I've got. I like this thing. Picture frames, there's nothing much better. So we're going to use that here, but what it won't do is it won't take this joint and clamp down like that. So we're going to take some F-clamps and put these in place. Finally, I'm a little bit proud right here on the edge, this side. So when it pulls it in tight, it's going to be trying to pull a compressive force across this member. That's not really what I want. This device is going to hold everything in place and keep it immensely square. But I think I'm going to have to follow up with another F-clamp here and here in order to tighten up those edges. So it's going to be a lot of clamps. I'm going to move the camera over here so you can see what's going on. And we'll just do this assembly and we'll get there. It's just going to take a little while. Well, I've broken out the door out of the clamps and it turned out pretty nice. The fit is good. As a matter of fact, it's so good that I'm going to have to trim some of it back just to get the door hinge in. As I said before, we have a little overlap right there. We're going to trim off these edges right here in a flush cut bit. Now the bearing rides high, so we'll trim off the low sides on both these, flip the piece over, and then come back and get those. Well, my lap joints look great, but as I said before, they're about a 32nd inch strong, and I'm going to level these out on my drum sander. Seems like the best thing to do. I'm going to put it in caddy corner. We're going to sand this back with a random orbital sander anyway, and kind of a first here. This is the first time I've used this machine in this shop. So there's a landmark there for you.
This is the biggest time saver I've got in my shop, but I tell you what, you can wear out a pair of sneakers using it.
Well, we're out of the drum sander, and it's time to make the recess to fit the plexiglass. Now I've got my plexi right here, and I have a plunge bit set in the table. Now that is raised up to the thickness of the plexiglass, and I'm set away because I have to make an inside cut here. Now I've got stop blocks set up, and that helps me orient the piece properly so I can push down and pick up. Now the last thing I would point out is, which way are we going? Typically you go this way, but that's when the bit is half buried in the table. This way, we're the other way, so we're going to be going this way on the router table. Always consider your bit, because a climb cut can take it out of your hands if you're not careful. I've only got one bit that makes a square hole, and it is not in the router table. So we'll take ourselves, make a couple of lines right here. Now we've got our square established. Go ahead and get the lines a little more solid. This isn't going to show. I'm not too worried about making what I would call a display joint. And then just ooze out the top, a little at a time. Sometimes you don't even need to use your mallet. Well, we've got our grooves cleaned up and we're ready to insert, or at least cut, the material to go in here. Now, plexiglass, a little different than wood. You want to keep your blade a little bit higher than you might otherwise, because it has a tendency to ride up. So we've got ourselves set at about 10.5 inches roughly. And my mark, I have made this already. I'm just a touch shy of where I need to be, which is good. I'm testing it against the fence. I'm not riding under. We'll take this slow. Make sure that you're a little bit higher. If it starts coming up, push down on it. If it gets up too high, it can kick back. And this stuff, this is something that could cut you.
We're drilling some holes in the plexiglass to allow the unit to breathe a bit. These are going to be placed toward the bottom of the door, and that will actually help push the sawdust into the chute.
I just finished cutting a piece of stock, and I had two marks, came from the router table, and that's going to be the stop, because this is going to come in and it's going to stop against something. Now I want it to stay put even when it's not being pulled tight by suction from the dust collection. So we're going to line them up pretty close. You don't have to be exact with this, but what you do have to do is you have to be in the same place. So I'll make a little mark right here. We'll take this over to the drill press now, and we'll countersink two holes, one for a metal washer and the other for a magnet.
Take the time to measure. Once that nail goes in, it's hard to get out.
We have to trim off the edge on, there's my magnet, this side, to accommodate the hinge. And I've got a measure already, so let's go ahead and set the saw and just push him through. And that's half of it. Now the other half is, it's going to be so tight when this door shuts, we need an angle over here. I'm going to give it about 10 degrees. Now we're going to sneak up on this because I've got this and I don't want to clip him. We're just there. So we'll come up on a 16th and give it a little bit of a nip and see where we end up. We're about halfway up, so I'm going to give it another 16th and we should be there. Always look. Yeah, we just kissed it. That'll be real good. This is not a great shot, and I know it, but I wanted to show you here. I've got my piano hinge set up, and it's this is the first step. It's evenly spaced in here, and I have a VIX bit, which will help me center the hole exactly where it needs to be. And boy, I tell you what, that moves a lot. I'm glad I got the clamps on. That should be a little better.
These are the strips that will hold in the plexiglass, and I already have them pre-drilled and countersunk. There is no pilot hole in the door, so I have the strip in place with a set of clamps, and I will use the same VIX bit to drill a pilot hole in the door. All this effort ensures that those screws go in without any fuss. We'll clean things up with a random orbital sander, and then we will disassemble and put the plexiglass in.
I have a sketch here on a piece of scrap plywood that I want to make into a clamp that also secures to the back of this cabinet. Basically, it comes through this hole right here, and I have a slot here where we'll pinch it and pinch down on the pipe. Now, after we've pinched it, we're going to have a couple of angle brackets here and here with a flat plate that it connects to, and that flat plate will screw into this back. So this is a prototype. We're going to take this to the bandsaw and rough it out. If it works, we'll go ahead and make it out of a little better material. Or if it works really well, we'll use this.
Never underestimate what you can do with a good assortment of clamps. You need many, and you need a variety. I've been working the fit on the oscillating spindle sander, and I'm just about there. We'll mark the high spots with a pencil and then clean those up.
Well, this turned out great. I don't see a reason to use this as a template. It's doing exactly what I want it to. If I take a nut and squeeze this tight, it won't go anywhere. But now we've got to get it attached to this, to the cabinet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a plate here and a plate here with a couple of screw holes. We'll see how sturdy that is. I'll go to the bandsaw. I'm going to cut out a section right here for that plate, and we'll fit it up. If it's super sturdy and stable, maybe we don't need some triangular supports. We'll see. Let me go over to the bandsaw. We'll make some cuts, and I've already got a piece set up to make what I'm talking about, this side brace right here. These two go into the back. These two will go into the brace. We're going to pre-drill these. Make sure we got them in the right place. Countersinking these two on one side is fine, but we have to do these two on the other side because that's how it's put together. Well, I've got my notch right here, and now I've got my setup right there. These are going to screw in like this right here. Bit of glue, I think it's going to be plenty solid. And of course, what I'll do here is these, and you almost need 3 hands to do this. This will be right here for the vertical. I'm going to do a 45 and a 90-degree orientation. And all I have to do is tap these holes. But first, let's get this glued in place and screwed in place. And that, in fact, is going to take about 3 hands. So I'll move over here to my workbench. We'll see how well it goes. This will not be exciting. The first thing we're going to do is get it to clamp in place. And think right there, we may be able to get this to work. All right, now that it's there, we're going to give it a little bit of a screw on the first one, and it'll hold him in place. Now this will let me take the clamp off. Still square? Okay. Okay. That's good and in place. Now, we hadn't put glue on, and that was on purpose. The first step was to get these tapped and in place. And that was my objective. Now, leave a little bit, just a touch of that on there, because when we put it back in again, that'll help us find the hole. Now, one of the things that I didn't do was I didn't mark which side was against which. This is lining up pretty well, and I think I can do this without the clamps. All right, that's good. I think that's great. That is super. All right, that's pretty good. I want to pre-drill the first hole, pushing it in tight. Don't need much more than that. I just want to get it started. Because once you get it started, they will self-tap. Okay, this is going to stay put because actually this right here will keep it in place.
Now I'll do the other three. We'll tap the holes for the 45 and the horizontal off camera.
This is the rig for the upright position. I have an extension coming up with a trailer off here that goes to the fence. This will hang from the top. I'll have a drop that comes down from the ceiling. And I think this works fantastic myself. But remember, we also want this to turn at 45 and at 90. So this rig will come off right here and will disappear. If I have my Incra-Jig in place, my Incra fence, that will not have dust collection in the fence. It's just that's the way it is. So we don't need this. We can go by strictly with this. And we can also go with it at an angle. So this rig stays intact. This is an accessory to be used in this position. As a result, this is going to stay with the top. This piece and this piece are all one unit. So what I'm going to do to make sure that they stay one unit is I'm going to drill 2 small holes, and I'm going to use these screws right here to secure them in place. And that's what I've been doing with the rest of my dust collection. Well, this is the configuration in the side, and I've got a small piece right here, call it a riser, call it a runner, I don't want you to call it anything, and a transition. And then I have this piece right here. This is designed specifically to go in, and of course this screws to a flexible hose. So this is another item that we'll keep that in the background for when we use this in this configuration. This is the same piece that'll use at 45. So really the only configuration that I've got right now that can use the dust collection from the fence is going to be the vertical. Should there be a time in the future that I want to do otherwise, we'll investigate it at that point. Now, I know this isn't dust collection, but I want to get set up for my assembly in the back that will bolt on, or screw on in this case, to support my Incra-Jig. Let's take a look at what we've got here. This fence is resting right on the cast iron, just like it should be. I have a piece of plywood here. Now that piece of plywood is what you would clamp down to the edges here. But my bit is all the way back here. So at a minimum, I need to be past the edge of my table. Plus, I can't screw in to the cast iron. So we're probably going to be out to here. And then on top of that, I really want the fence to come back to here if I want to do larger boxes and put dovetails in them, because the piece is going to slide back and forth. So I need to be able to have my clamping supported on a cantilever base out to here. I mean, there's no two ways around it. Otherwise, this isn't going to work well at all. So I've got a good piece of plywood right here. We're going to build a cantilevered base that comes out and supports this in its four screw slots and keeps it good and solid. And that's what we're going to work on next. I pulled out a piece of stock from our rolling storage episode. We still have some leftover material. And, you know, as I said in that episode, it's not real good material. It's a little warped, but I think we can make it work. My design has some reinforcing on the corners, so I should be able to force it square. I've got a number of marks here. We're just going to cut these up and rough cut it here. We're going to clean it up on the table saw. I'm going to start by ripping them all to width, and my first measure is the base, and that is 9 inches wide, and we'll just continue ripping as we go to the measures that I have already identified in my sketch. I'm cutting out a corner here to avoid a brace, and that's typically done in tight places where you don't want to get an exact cut. This will work just fine, but I want the corner to be rounded, so I'll go ahead and cut that out with my Foster bit. I've got my 2 braces here stacked up. I'll cut both of them at the same time. I'm going to go ahead and clip this corner right here and right there, and at the same time I'm going to put a little arch down here because this area is not needed for the support. I'll hold both pieces together using the fence to cut this. I'll move or adjust the fence to cut this, and we'll freehand this. I'll do that after I've kind of secured the pieces together so they don't separate.
Having marked the mounting holes for the Incra-Jig base, I'll take it to the drill press and pre-drill those holes.
Just finished putting some glue on here. I'm doing some trim pieces, and that is just kind of, it's going to match what everything else is. It's the same material I used on it all. And when the glue's on there like that, it's a little sticky. So I'm using this to index it. So when I make pressure, when I put some pressure on with my nail gun, it doesn't move, because it will. See, you just did. I'm wondering if I'm going to have to use a clamp. I think I have to change positions. That dimension right there is pretty critical. I need that to be right there. Okay, that'll hold him in place. Okay. Now I have this on with 2 screws right now, but the big trick on this is to push back hard, make sure this is flush in the back, and you want this to line up with that bit, because once it lines up, this moving back and forward isn't as important, but right here I need that slot to be there, otherwise my measure's wrong. So now that I'm there, I'm going to push him all the way forward, and the weight will hold it in place. Now I'm going to come back, drill a couple of holes, and we'll suck it up tight. We are lined up exactly with the bit. Man, that's good. Yeah, that is really nice.
I've hooked it up to the dust collection to give it a test, and I must admit, it seems to work pretty good.
Well, that about wraps it up for the woodworking. I think this turned out great. I love the door up front. And the dust collection is actually the best of any of my router tables. I've got plenty of storage here for the drawers. We're on wheels. And this outrigger in the back is perfect for my Incra-Jig. And when I'm not using it, it comes right off and then I can use my dedicated fence. So I'm thinking this project is just about there. What's left? Well, we're gonna put a little bit of a finish on it. It's not gonna be anything extensive, but we do have maple, and I'm thinking we'll put a little bit of a dye on it, lighter than our Bombay box, but we'll spray it with dye and then we'll put some sort of a finish on top of it. I think maybe a polyurethane or a water-based urethane. So that'll be next episode. But for this one, I think we're finished. But I hope to see you next time in Roby's workshop.